To our manuhiri, tēnā koutou katoa, invited guest staff online and of course our councillors around the table. We're going to start with the Karakia. Piri, you're going to lead us.
Thank you,
so
Chair.
Thank you.
Just as an introduction, particularly for our visitors, our manuhiri that have arrived today, we have an app that is downloadable by anyone across Hawke's Bay, indeed New Zealand or the world. And we have a waiata in there that has been composed for our councils, all 5 across Hawke's Bay. And it's called Pūrākau. And I'm going to set the pace. So we're going to go slowly through this. The waiata, and when you look at the words that can be translated by pushing the green I button, you will see how appropriate they are in terms of using them as an invocation or as a karakia for us. So I'll set the pace. It's called Pūrākau. And we'll start with the first line. Te ara I whanatu aira, pūrākau e tū mai nei, e piki ki runga, kia mārama aho, kei raro ko te matau, te whakatikanga ake ki runga rā, ka titi whā te reretai, te ara I whanatu aira. Ko te kura ki aho, hei tohu noa ake ki te kura I te reretai. Te whakawhiti o te rā, te whakaai o whenua, poki muri mai au ki te iwi, te ara I whanatu aira. E aku rangatira, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, kia ora tēnā koe Piri. So today we have quite a few items to get through. I have apologies from Councillor Van Beek, Councillor Sears and also Mike Paku to join us at 2:30. Councillor Hokianga will need to depart at 2:30. So can I have a mover and a seconder for those apologies, please? Thank you, Councillor McIntosh and Harding. All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Are there any notices? There are none. Conflict of interest declarations for these items today? There are none, thank you. Confirmation of the minutes from the last Regional Council meeting held on the 26th of July and the extraordinary Regional Council meeting held on 2nd of August. Are there any additions or changes to be made to those minutes? Carl, if there are none, can I please have a mover? Councillor Hokianga, seconder Councillor Harding. All those agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Kia ora. Moving on to item 4, call for mind the agenda is not on the item.
Item is not on the agenda.
There are none. Thank you. Okay, we move to item 5. So I'd like to welcome up our guests. We have Paul Bailey. Would you like to bring anyone else up, Paul, or was it just yourself? You'll be okay by yourself? Yeah. So here representing the Wise Water Use Hawke's Bay petition. We do have a paper in front of us. We have received your petition. Thank you very much. And we have 5 minutes with you, Paul, to give us your presentation or overview before we move on with this item. So tēnā koe and kia ora.
Yeah, kia pai. Thank you for accepting the petition, Council. Thank you to all councillors for having a read through of it, and thank you to all those who signed on behalf of Wise Water Use. Really appreciate the input from the members of the public. Look, the question in front of you, I mean, I know you haven't got a paper about it today, but it will be coming at some stage. But we thought we'd get the horse before the cart and actually have this discussion today about Water Holdings Hawke's Bay using the excuse of legal impediment about payment of the science charges. I've been in the collection industry. I was in the collections industry for about 10 years, and part of that role was I used to get and have to review all the disputes that clients had where they had got their lawyers involved. And so I'm pretty familiar with what's going on here, right? So here I see it. So first question I sort of always ask myself is what was contracted between the parties. So Water Holdings Hawke's Bay, like everyone else, was well aware that there was a legal impediment when they purchased the assets and IP of the Ruatana Water Storage Scheme. That's public knowledge, and that was the reason why it was canned by the Regional Council or Hatchbrick to begin with. And Water Holdings Hawke's Bay, of course, also actually agreed, and if you have a look at paragraph 12 there, that the purchaser accepts all ongoing costs associated with the IP and assets, including consent charges. So they agreed at the time they purchased that they were going to pay these things. Now that's an extract from the publicly excluded papers which we obtained under a legoima. And also, you know, one of the things I used to look at was, have they already paid some of the bill? Well, Water Holdings Hawke's Bay didn't dispute the science charges that they paid in 2018, 2019, 2019, 2020. So, you know, so any subsequent claims about non-payment because of impediment, I believe that makes that claim vexatious. You know, it's just not there. So why the payment of the science charges of the $382,946 is fair and reasonable? Now, Water Holdings Hawke's Bay, for some reason claiming they weren't told about the changes to the long-term plan, but they were, and how that was going to be calculated, because that was in the consultation document that you all put out. And the Water Holdings Hawke's Bay, they also had the benefit of being told, asked to submit on the long-term plan, last long-term plan, by the chief executive at the time, James Palmer. The fact that they didn't avail themselves of that opportunity is their problem. It's not your problem. So there's just a copy of the copy of the email which we got through legoima, where James is advising one of the directors, Tim Gilbertson, that the methodology on the changes to the science charge, changes to the science charges are going to happen in the long-term plan and the welcome submission. You know, there's evidence of this sort of stuff going on. And the consultation document that you put out, that the council put out, was very clear how the changes were going to affect consent holders. And there's no excuse for Water Holdings Hawke's Bay not to get out a calculator and work out what the charges were going to be for them. Because there's how you calculate it. That comes out of your long-term plan consultation document. It's pretty straightforward. They know what volumes of water they've got consented. They get a calculator out, plug the numbers in, and away they go. And they go, hang, that's going to cost me a whole lot more. Let's put a submission. Did that happen? No. And the other thing is that, of course, the public has every expectation that this will happen. Everyone has to pay their rates and charges in a timely manner, so why not Water Holdings Hawke's Bay? Why are they an exception? Why are they special? And the other one, of course, is that back August last year, this time last year, you agreed that all charges, all of the current outstanding charges until the end of the current financial year, which is, what was that, 30th of June this year, and all the outstanding signed charges will be due and liable in total. So you took the 2 months overdue from that, from charges that were already 3 years overdue. And regardless of, you know, the other thing about why it's fair and reasonable that this payment is made, regardless of whether Water Holdings Hawke's Bay is able to make use of the consents or not, council staff have to assume that they will be actioned whilst planning for future resource use in Central Hawke's Bay, because they're there and they're still live. And so that puts council staff in a really awkward position of being unable to move forward and adequately plan for the needs of all the Central Hawke's Bay water users. I mean, when I think back to my time on council about the hoo-ha that happened after the dam scheme was, after the Ruatana water storage scheme was canned, a lot of that was, you know, it was confusion around what is actually possible in the future and stuff like that. So, and that conversation, we believe is still going on. So where to from here? Now, the Regional Council, you have your own collection processes that have to be followed. The system to maintain integrity in the eyes of all ratepayers. So you have got a document, which I'll come to, which kind of outlines how you manage your outstanding debtors. And failing to pay within 120 days, the steps should be taken to either place Water Holdings Hawke's Bay into liquidation or accept the surrender of the consents. Now, Water Holdings Hawke's Bay has made an offer a number of different times, and again, it's in emails that we've obtained through the corners, to surrender the consents. So it's not something that they're unaware of. And an offer to do that would be much appreciated, and acceptance of that would be much appreciated. But your collection processes are, again, outlined in there. So if you go down to the, what I want is the fourth or fifth bullet, to sixth bullet point down the seventh one, for non-rate debt collection, which is what we're talking about here, you have to apply a similar process when an invoice is raised, it's sent to the customer, so on and so on. So you're talking about, you send them a couple of letters. Well, there's numerous emails going back and forth between council staff and Water Holdings Hawke's Bay about the outstanding debt. But the one down the bottom, if it becomes overdue by 120 days, the debt will be sent to an external debt collection agency. Debt collection agencies attempt to collect the debt 3 times, and so on. And if you're sending it to a debt collection agency, you're obviously prepared to also take full legal action, which is, like I say, to put the company into liquidation. There shouldn't be any excuse for any delay. I find it remarkable that that we still haven't got a paper in front of us, or you guys still haven't got a paper in front of you to make a decision around this issue. It's pretty clear that you've already got a process about how you should be doing things. I mean, I feel sorry for the new chief executive that he's been handed this issue. It should have been dealt with a number of years ago. It wasn't. But we have, like I say, was it 200? No, whatever the number was of people who ended up getting the petition signed. And I'll table this. There have been some additional signatures coming since we circulated the list to you. So it has gone up.
Thanks, Paul. Are we nearly at the end?
We're very, very close.
Yes.
So there's significant public demand that these monies be paid in full. And again, I go back, you made the decision to collect payment in full of all science charges in August 22, and overturning this decision will be a significant public interest when seen against the background of increasing rates bills. I've had a lot of feedback this week about that particular issue. In fact, I had one of my colleagues at work say to me this morning, tell those bastards that they've put my rates up 25%, they need to collect the outstanding debt. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate the time you've come to present to us. I do note there's some references in there about our CEO and his new responsibilities. So if you'd like to quickly comment, Nick.
Just to note, look, I think it's really important. We've heard via Mr. Bailey from the community, and thank you for that. There's a decision before the organisation to come, and clearly that will need to take into account council's policies and the Resource Management Act, and that's probably as far as I should comment at this point.
Thank you. Well, it's time now to accept and move the petition as it's presented. Can I please have a mover to do that? Thank you, Councillor Williams, and a seconder. Thank you. Councillor Williams, would you like to speak?
Madam Chair.
Councillor Harding?
Madam Chair, point of order. Madam Chair, I'd like to move an amendment to this recommendation, if I could. I'd like to add after the word petition in the recommendation that, sorry, I get to the page here, that we confirm the Council's resolution of the 31st of August 2022 that all outstanding science charges are due and liable for payment in total by 30 June 2023. So simply adding that prior resolution of, if you like, the status quo of where the Council's position is at the moment.
Just a minute. Would you like the correct resolution from that meeting? Because that does not seem to be the correct resolution.
Well, no, that's my amendment, is confirms the Council's resolution of 31st of August 2022 that all outstanding science charges are due and liable for payment in total by 30 June 2023.
As long as that's the correct wording?
No, that's my amendment to this resolution.
Madam Chair, what's the existing one at the moment, please? I think it's helpful. Sorry, there's two things here through you, Chair. The existing resolution is just to receive the petition.
Yeah.
The actual wording of the resolution of the 31st of August last year, 2022, was to defer collection of current outstanding charges until the end of the current financial year, and that all outstanding science charges will be due and liable in total.
That's what it says up there.
That's what it says up there.
Yeah, it's up there.
So is that your amendment, Councillor Curtin?
Yes, I'm happy to go with
And confirms.
resolution, the third part of that resolution 3 of that prior resolution.
Well, given this is a presentation of a petition, you're adding a new resolution.
Sure, I'm amending the current resolution, the current recommendation. So that's my amendment.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the purpose of that is worthwhile, but let's test that. If that's what
Chair, could we get
amendment
some
you'd like to
advice
table.
on the procedure for moving an amendment to a motion and how far the amendment to the motion can go relative to the principal motion itself? Is there any guidance there?
Ian?
Or is that up?
So it needs to deal with the issue at being discussed.
Yeah.
The other thing is we just need a seconder, and then we could move to vote on the amendment.
Right, so we need a seconder for the amended motion.
Yes.
Yeah,
Is there a seconder to that
Yeah,
amendment?
I'm, Madam Chair, I'm happy to second that.
Okay. So we'll vote on the amendment, or would you like to
I'd
speak
like
to
to
it?
speak to it if I could. Yeah.
2 minutes, please, Councillor
Well, I
Curtin.
have 5 in standing orders.
2 and 2, so we'll keep it really fair so we can move on with the agenda.
Well, I have 5 in standing orders, so you're wanting to depart from standing orders. Madam Chair and councillors, it's my experience that events and decisions of council are often characterised and define the term of a council, and my feeling, and it has been my experience of the past, that this particular issue does just that. It defines the character of a council term, and I refer to the values of the organisation of the regional council, and in particular accountability and transparency. And it's my view in proposing this amendment that we both are accountable and transparent with the public at large and ratepayers in particular, and those that pay our way. And why I refer to that is that it would be strange indeed if we were to depart from a prior resolution to ensure that these fees and charges were collected and went down another track. So we need to be clear with the public that where we're heading, the reasons for going down a particular direction, but in particular around accountability. My view, Madam Chair, is that the decision to deviate from a prior resolution, in other words, to deviate from collection of these fees and charges, needs to be had around this table. I do not believe for a moment that it's tenable for councillors to defer this decision to the staff, to the Chief Executive in particular. It would have the effect of essentially hiding from that decision. It ought to be ours. It's a big decision to make. It's a lot of money in the first instance. It's one of the biggest consents in New Zealand at present. It's for over 100 million cubic metres of water in terms of take. We're talking about 8 million cube of water a week discharged to land should it be implemented, and the relevant science charges that relate to it are very extensive. So this council have expended over 20 million already on this, and it's important that we are accountable at this table for collecting or making a decision to collect these fees and charges. The second area and value that we have as an organisation is around transparency, and it is would be of great concern in my view, and the public would have great concern, and particularly the submitters in this case, or the petitioners in this case, that council was somehow cowered into submission, were, if you like, to walk away, essentially to throw the chief executive under the bus to make a decision on our behalf. And it's my view that we ought not to do that, that we ought to ensure there's transparency, that we've got a decision in front of us, that the councillors make that decision, and that we're not cowered into a position where the threat of some sort of litigation means that we walk away from implementing a legitimately found policy and procedure around fees and charges, and that we get on and this council makes that decision. So if we deviate from that decision, that the decision should be around this table, and we should be clear with the public about why, if indeed we did that, why we would walk away and not collect this debt. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Curtin. Councillor Hokianga.
Ai, kia ora tātou. Ai, tēnā hoki koe e te hiamana. Just as a first term councillor, I've just coming into the role and understanding the wider public interest around the around this take, around this issue. But my previous experience has been an extensive mana whenua interest in this take. But so I have somewhat relied on the previous experience of my fellow councillors around the table, and notwithstanding the most, is it okay to say this, Councillor Curtin, the most senior councillor in the room.
Country.
So my seconding of the motions essentially to understand a view, and I think it's a view worth considering in the discussion. Wea, tēnā tātou.
Kia ora, Councillor. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you. In moving the original motion, I was really wanting to thank Paul for the time and attention in bringing information to our desk to ensure that it was clear in front of us. But in speaking to the amended motion, I just wanted to make a couple of points. One is actually a question, and it's whether the motion, if you could put last time's motion up, resolution please, back on the screen.
Thanks, Paul.
Whether that matter should have come to the council, the question will be, I'm going to get to I'm not putting the question yet, whether we should have been making that decision at the time at all. That's a question, I think, an issue in itself. I note that I voted against that motion on the basis that I didn't think the charges should be deferred. In other words, they should simply be paid. So I'm not sure where that leaves me now voting in favour of a motion to accept that, but albeit the time has since passed. Substantively, I've got a procedural issue in that we had on the agenda to receive a petition. Mm-hmm. And normally motions of this stature, significance and degree of controversy would be well in front of us. Mm-hmm. And to have a substantive motion on the table now that we basically adopt last year's motion, which maybe never should have been in front of us anyway, without prior notice and chance to reflect on that, has taken me by surprise. And while I have considerable sympathy for some of what Councillor Curtin has shared, not all of it, but some of it, I'm not finding myself in a position where, regardless of the principles at stake, I feel comfortable on voting in it at the back end of a petition. So if this is to come back to us in substantive terms, I might be in a different place. Mm-hmm. But to return to my question, should this even be in front of us or not? And if not, I think I'd probably be back to the original motion in terms of my thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harding.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I was collecting my thoughts to speak to the original motion, but I think I'll be able to parlay them into this alternative motion and explain why I won't be able to support the motion, is that having received, as we all have received, a view from our incoming Chief Executive that this is an issue which ought to have been a management issue rather than an issue for governance, and armed with that knowledge and with the express assurance that we are not throwing our Chief Executive under the bus in accepting that point of view from our Chief Executive, that we are expecting that the process will be that this item will be resolved by management. Okay, so that is a having tested our Chief Executive on that point and satisfied ourselves that that is a reasonable way to proceed. I cannot vote for something which would attempt to reverse that understanding that I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just wanted to begin and thank Mr. Bailey and his group that had presented this petition today, and back up Councillor Williams' thoughts there that this was just to receive the petition. I will just note one thing you said there is this should have been handled a couple of years ago, and I couldn't agree more, and comes back to the point that Councillor Williams just raised. Should we have even been going through the process we went through August last year? And so on that matter, I won't support the amendment simply because it just seems like we're going around and around in circles and never getting this resolved. And so to, I guess, approach this a different way, which has largely been discussed in the previous comments now, I think is the right way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh.
Yes, really just reinforcing the points of view of Councillor Foley and Williams. I just don't feel comfortable supporting an amendment that is substantively different to what we started with without, to use Councillor Williams' terms, prior warning and sort of understanding of the detail behind that. So I can't support the amendment.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
Just in conclusion, Madam Chair, can I take my right?
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the fairness of our manuhiri who we've only given 5 minutes, so that's why I'm trying to keep the time within a respectable.
Sure. I'll do my best, very best, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, just in summing up the consideration of this amendment, I do find it somewhat ironic that we have an amendment which confirms the status quo. That is, if you like, the baseline, and for any subsequent decision or even action on behalf of the staff, they know where we started from. There has not been any other public consideration of this around this table other than where we are currently. So any conversations we may have had are not in public. They were casual conversations between councillors. And I go back to it that if we are to take a step which is different than the status quo, that is the debt is owed and needs to be collected, then that discussion needs to be held in public and by councillors. And I just don't think it would be acceptable to simply go quiet on this, say nothing, and expect something to happen at a different level than around this table. I would say that the public expect us to step up and make a decision one way or the other. And that's the reason for wanting to put this in front of councillors now, so we have that opportunity to express a view. And if and it looks like it may not proceed, I would expect at some future point, if there's a variation from the current status of this fee and charge that is owed, then we should have a public debate about that and resolve accordingly. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Curtin. Thank you for everyone's views on this. So the amendment is put to the table. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
And 2, and those against?
No.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Can we
Division
have those
called for.
recorded, please? So that
It comes back to the original motion.
comes back to the original. So now we have
Excuse me.
Yes.
Neil's asked for a division.
the division.
Yes.
So
2,
those-
you mean
Just to
numbers?
vote recorded.
Yes,
Yeah.
so I've read them out
Okay.
to be recorded. Yep. So we're back to the original recommendation. So councillor Williams, you
I would
originally
now like
moved
to
that.
speak to the original motion. I have moved it. I believe it's been seconded. In addition to thanking the petitioner and all those who signed it, I would commend to our Chief Executive Officer's attention the points of substance made in that petition for due consideration. The one that particularly resonates with me is that of a fair and consistent treatment of all our ratepayers, given the burdens currently being faced in this very difficult inflationary and high cost of living environment. But I would leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Harding?
Thank you, Chair. Look, I also like to thank Paul and everyone in Wisewater East Hawke's Bay for not only for this petition, but for the valuable debate that they bring to water use in Hawke's Bay. And I'd like to thank Councillor Curtin for using this opportunity to highlight issues which has resulted in some valuable discussion. Ultimately, I felt the need to signal today that we had an understanding from our new chief executive that this may come off the table, and there are some matters of questions of process potentially around that. But that is, as far as I'm concerned, a service to you, Paul. You know, the least we could do was to signal, give the best signal we can about where things sit, rather than have you go away none the wiser. So thank you for your work.
Thank you. Any other speakers? No, come on. So the motion sits on the table. All those who agree
So
say
you're moving the
recommendations that are in the item. Yes. All those who agree to receive the petition say aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. Kia ora.
division called for.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you so much for allowing that little debate. That was excellent. Appreciate that. And good luck, Chief Executive Pete, with the decision.
Kia ora. So moving on to our next item, council decisions. Item 6, council delegations.
Through you, Chair, I just asked Shannon Johnston to join members at the table. Shannon's a partner in Cooper Rapley Law and has considerable experience and knowledge around delegations, and just wanted to ensure that we had Shannon here in case you have any questions about the delegations process. So this is hopefully a fairly procedural item. Part of you appointing a new chief executive is that council goes through the process of approving delegations, and that's what this item seeks to do. And I understand they're consistent with the delegations that are applied to chief executives across the regional sector. What this process doesn't do is negate things that sit in legislation that mean that some things you cannot delegate to a chief executive. So the legislation overrides this process, if you like, in those sort of situations. I'm just going to invite Shannon to see if she's got any comments on the process, and then open for questions, Chair.
Yeah, kia ora, Shannon, welcome. Thank you for being here with us.
Kia ora, Chair. Kia ora koutou. It's nice to be here with you today. It's nice to see where Nick's ended up, and I'm sure the Hawke's Bay is treating him kindly. We miss him in the Menua too. But I just wanted to reflect on the paper before you, just to really provide some reassurance that what you're doing is delegating to Nick a suite of powers, functions and responsibilities that would usually sit with council under statute, and they range over a spectrum of enactments that are set out at Appendix A to the report. Those are all pieces of legislation that the Chief Executive needs to make decisions under on your behalf on an operational day-to-day basis. What the paper doesn't do, as Nick has alluded to, is delegate powers that are prevented or restricted under legislation. So the resolutions before you are explicit that the delegations you are providing are subject to any restrictions or prohibitions imposed by council or required by any enactment. And an example which is set out in the paper that you would have reviewed is the power of sub-delegation under the Resource Management Act. A similar power is restricted under the Local Government Ratings Act. So Nick wouldn't be able to take on those powers, and your delegation or your recommendation or resolution doesn't enable that. Otherwise, you are authorising the Chief Executive to appoint warrant officers under the Local Government Act and any other enactment, including the Resource Management Act. You are authorising the power of sub-delegation where authorised by law, and you're providing Nick with the authority under legislation to instruct lawyers, settle proceedings and sign any memoranda of understanding. There's general principles of delegation that I'm all sure that you're well aware of. The purpose of them is to ensure that you are delegating decision-making to the lowest competent level within the organisation so that you can have efficient and effective decision-making on a daily basis. It means that you can govern and Nick can get around running the council and at an operation level without having to come back to you with every decision that needs to be made under legislation. So a very ordinary decision that you're being asked to do today, but I just wanted to point out those caveats. You are not carte blanche providing Nick the ability to make all decisions. He is restricted by the limits and parameters in legislation.
Thank you, Shannon. Just to start the questioning, is this the common expectation, say, with our last CEO, the delegations, and then regional council CEOs around the country? This is very standard.
Yes, I have experience with a number of councils, including regional councils, where delegations are brought to council not only for chief executives but also council officers. I'm presently working with Katrina Brunton on a review of your delegations, and I understand there's going to be a second part to the suite of work. I encourage councils to have these delegations sitting within a manual where you're pulling together all your delegations across your organisation into one place, and that's work that Katrina and her team have underway now. It's work that I am encouraging. And I also understand that there is going to be a refresh of the delegations policy, which also sets out the parameters within which any person with delegated authority acts. We should note also that these delegations do not interfere with the financial delegations and other delegations that you already have in place. Your ordinary restrictions around that still apply to Nick and his decision-making under these pieces of legislation.
Right, that's fantastic. Thank you, Shannon. Questions? Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. Look, that all seems clear and sensible. I just really, as much for the public benefit as my own, just wanted to ask for your, if you could paint a picture around the restraint on delegation as to the approval of a planning instrument, I think under clause 17 of Schedule 1, and the ability of the CEO to sign off consent orders in court proceedings. My experience of being in many mediations around plan appeals is that things get settled, all parties have to have authority to settle, and yet there can be quite deep issues of policy at stake, which ordinarily would sit alongside governance. And we had a very close and careful process before, say, Change 9, otherwise known as TANK, was released through the Regional Planning Committee, following a long stakeholder engagement process. So when, whether, would, if, how might Change 9 come back to our attention, or wouldn't it, before its final approval? Just some discussion around that.
Well, thank you, Councillor. It's a good question, and it's one that I've come across in other local authorities. essentially, the restriction you're referring to sits within the Resource Management Act. It's that council can't delegate to an employee or a hearings commissioner the final approval of a plan under clause 17. The courts have said that final approval is effectively affixing the seal. So it's the final endorsement of the plan when it comes back to you to declare it as operative.
I see.
You are able to delegate all other steps to that point, and the Act is clear about that. You are also very right that when we turn up to mediation as lawyers, the Commissioner will always ask, do you have the ability to settle? And so I go back to my point about efficient and effective decision-making and the ability for us as lawyers or your council officers to be able to know that they have the ability to resolve proceedings in that moment in line with the expectation of the court. That's why the ability for Nick to be able to make those decisions on your behalf is important. What I'm also aware of is that there will be times through these sorts of processes where councils will put in place internal checks and balances around reporting up. So you might have your Strat and Poll Committee, for example, that might receive updates on any particular plan change process or other matter that Nick might be dealing with in terms of litigation. And he would be able to raise with you progress reports and flag up any matters, at which point you could deal with that. But I see that as a separate, that's a good management process point as opposed to a delegation point.
Thank you very much, it's very helpful.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Harding?
Oh, I don't think I was next in the queue, but.
Okay. Well, we'll just go
Have
with
you
you
go?
now.
Okay,
Yep.
right, very briefly. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Councillor.
Just a couple of, well, first, the sort of obvious question, just to understand how, if at all, this differs from previous delegations. And I just flicked through the list of authorisations in the appendix, and the Water Services Act in there. So I think maybe the answer for that first question is really, this is the same again, but just picking up any changes in legislation.
Yes, that's right. And I would actually like, and I mentioned to Nick and Katrina before this meeting, that the appendix should be updated now that we have a Natural and Built Environment Act 2023 and a Spatial Planning Act 2023. You will see there in the appendix that there is a further provision that essentially enables that list to be updated, or for Nick to act as if the list was updated where there are changes in legislation. But I think that for the Madam Chair, if there was an amendment, it would be maybe to note that the appendix should be updated to reflect those new enactments. But certainly, we're not reinventing the wheel here. These are pieces of legislation that, in my experience, chief executives of councils need to operate on, and I understand that your previous chief executives have had, certainly have had similar types of delegations in place.
Thank you. Look, my second question was around financial, and I think that you probably answered already, financial delegations, and the question in my head has been, and it might be that you can direct me to the right place to understand this, but we as council, we approve a plan with a budget, a financial budget. What happens if we, what happens if we don't meet the budget? What happens if we not operating in the surplus? If we go to a deficit, what happens to delegations there? And maybe that you just point me to the finance team to get the answer to that.
Well, I would have to say that at the present, I'm reviewing your statutory delegations. I haven't been through your financial delegations closely at all. But in my experience, what you would have is that you will have a suite of financial delegations that enable Nick to operate to a certain level. And if there are exceedances of those limits, then there would be reporting requirements, and those sorts of matters would come back to council.
Not normally a problem,
And that's
but
what
in an extraordinary year, it's a live question in my mind.
Yes, no, I accept that we are in an extraordinary situation up here, and presumably those financial delegations will be being reviewed in that light.
Yeah, and happy to get the finance team to update that post this meeting if that helps.
Thank you. And just finally, briefly, coming from a banking background, liking to have everything lined up and financial delegation, all delegations in one spot, the idea of bringing all those delegations in one spot that you've talked about is wonderful.
Yes, I'm a big advocate for it. We've just recently had some experience before the Environment Court defending some delegations, and the Environment Court said, while it's not something that's required of a council, it is good practice, and it's something that I've always and certainly encouraged my clients to do. It's a living document. It sits within the council's information system. Council officers can go in at any time and understand where their parameters of delegation sit, and it's just a useful tool for everybody to understand what they can and can't do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome aboard, Shannon. We're very
Thank you,
pleased to have some of your skill set.
It's lovely to be here.
Giving us some help along the way. Listen, I just want to direct you to paragraph 10 of the paper, where you're talking about a delegated power must be exercised in accordance with relevant council policy and conditions, etc. And we just talked about some of the financials, processing, reporting. So just an aside, when I look at paragraph 21, the significance of this decision is very low. I'd challenge that assertion made in the paper, because I believe they are very significant decisions. But going to it, I'd just like you to, and you've probably heard some of the debate discussion on the earlier agenda items. It's interesting that they've been superimposed the way they are. And the desire from councillors to fully understand, if you like, the dynamics and operation. So my question really is, in terms of those delegations, we can be straightforward with a financial limit that the Chief Executive will come back if a financial limit is approached. But there are other parameters around exercising the delegations, which I'm interested to explore with you. And in particular, where a delegation comes up against a policy position or stretches the policy position. And dare I say it, with the earlier agenda item does that to some extent. So if we've got a remissions policy, for example, and the interpretation of that is stretched, or there is uncertainty around it, what is best practice for a Chief Executive to come back to Council for direction or resolution, notwithstanding the fact that in that particular example, the previous Chief Executive came back to Council for consideration. So can you give us a feel for custom and practice, and when a Chief Executive ought to be prudent and come back to Council for decision?
Again, I go back to my response to Councillor Williams around where often there's a delegations matter and then there's a process matter. In appointing your Chief Executive, you are placing a degree of trust and confidence in their ability to understand the workings of the council around the table and what's important to them and what is not, and you will be in regular contact with your Chief Executive about those matters. So there is a degree of judgment around that. But ultimately, when you delegate powers under legislation at an operational level, they are undertaken bearing in mind the experience that they bring and the knowledge and understandings of the workings of council, any particular directions, any policies that are live, and they make those decisions within that context. So it's really an element of discretion as to a reporting up requirement unless there is a direction. It's not unusual for Chief Executives to be provided with a decision to make at an operational level, and for them to decide, okay, well, this feels like a political matter, I'm going to give my council a heads up on that.
Sure.
That's not necessarily a requirement, but it's a good working relationship between a Chief Executive and council. But it doesn't limit the delegated authority in any way. It's a matter for how you work with your Chief Executive, how the Chair works with the Chief Executive, as opposed to a delegation question, I would suggest.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
It did very well.
Thank you. Any other questions for either Nick or Shannon?
Sorry, Chair, I have another question, but it's actually for Leanne.
Sure.
The recommendation 3 is that we delegate to the Chief Executive all, etc., subject to any restrictions or prohibitions imposed by Council. In the absence of us imposing such a restriction today for some reason, are there any? So it would be really the ones set by law that we would be. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. If there are no other questions, we have recommendations 1 through to 6. Councillor Williams, would you like to move? Thank you. Can I please have a seconder? Councillor Harding, would you like to speak any further?
Just very briefly, that I think this is actually maybe not significant in the sense of requiring consultation of the Local Government Act, but this is a very significant step that we take here, and an important one to ensure that our Chief Executive is equipped to run this organisation in an efficient and effective way and to sub-delegate to that end where required. I think in employing a Chief Executive, we would do so on the understanding that that officer has a judgment and would exercise the discretions and delegations prudently. And where in that officer's judgment matters are material, controversial, policy loaded, their discretion would be exercised to involve us, as Shannon has suggested, and ensure that we're at least briefed. I would just like to encourage some line of sight on the tank process, for example. We have a reporting every month on appeal processes we're in, just to have some line of sight of where consent orders have got to, if there's anything really big coming or grunty coming, just to keep that conversation going with us about the types of issues that are being confronted, and so that we have a travelling understanding of that, so that when we get to that final stage, we're not taken by surprise. But I'm sure that all probably went without saying, and I just wanted to make sure that that was on the table nevertheless.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Harding?
Kia ora, Chair. Look, I just wanted to clarify in seconding this, that what I'm seconding is the appendix we are reading in, we are reading in the National and Built Environment Act and the Strategic Planning Act, so so we can avoid having to do this twice unnecessarily. Okay.
Can we have that noted? Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other speakers? There are none. All those who agree, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. Officially, well done, Nick.
Thank you very much, Councillor.
Thank you, Shannon. Kia ora.
Do we start paying him now, do we?
Yeah. We've been holding off for a while. Okay, we move on to item 7, which is the RPC and Māori Committee appointees remuneration review. Piri, would you like to lead us in that?
Chair, I would, but it would be good if there's any questions, if we could have Desi up here as well. So Desi and our
Welcome,
governance
Desi.
team have been very much involved in this. Just perhaps a few high points that both myself and Desi could share with you in regard to the paper. But this was last in front of you on the 26th of July, and at that point you deferred back to respectively the Māori Committee and also the Regional Planning Committee, so they could actually discuss what had come through in terms of the substantive paper from strategic pay. That's the only point I wanted to highlight at this point, and passing to Desi if there's anything else. Otherwise, I just wanted to identify that in our recommendations, there's a range that's indicated in there, and I wanted to reference you to actually paragraph 15, which actually gives you a closer estimate that you might consider in terms of the recommendation. Was there anything else, Desi?
No, other than to say that we believe that was quite a robust and collaborative process that it's been through. We kicked it off nearly a year ago, and this is the culmination of that year review, and that we find that the suggested recommendations from strategic pay are fair and reasonable. So.
Thank you. And thank you to you and your team, Piri, also, for undergoing this review. Are there any questions for Piri or Desi? Yeah, Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want, can I go to paragraph 15 in the table? I just want to understand the comparisons here. So for the RPC, the co-chair, each co-chair receives 27,500, is that correct?
So the co-chair is currently Tanya Hopmans, which is the RPC.
So there's just one chair?
Just one, because I'm the other.
Is the other co-chair.
Okay. So the chair, like the co-chair in this case, is remunerated at 27,500, correct? And the co-chairs combined, in other words, are there two Māori Committee co-chairs?
That's correct.
That's right.
So they're getting, that's shared between the two of them?
That's correct, Councillor.
And ditto for the chair, the deputy co and the chairs. So essentially, the Māori Committee members and chairs and co-chairs are paid around half of what the RPC members have received. Is that a fair assumption?
So I think the important part here, and this was undertaken by Strategic Pay, these were independent reviews respectively of each one of those committees. And I think we need to appreciate that in terms of what's been put through in the recommendations. They weren't brought together and then assessed as a continuum. They were actually separated out, and that was one of the requirements.
I don't know if that was my question. The question was, you know.
But it leads to what the figures are in terms of 15 and in terms of the recommendations.
But essentially, I know what you're asking, that 32,000 for the co-chairs of the Māori Committee need to split that, so they, it's estimated that they get half of what the co-chair, just one of the RPC, is recommending to receive.
Well, if I go straight to the substantive question, do we create such an anomaly in terms of the two respective committees, given their functions, by remunerating so diversely?
I'll have a go at answering that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the decision to have co-chairs was the Māori Committee members. So usually it would be a chair, but they chose to have co-chairs. So they split the salary.
So it's their choice?
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Harding.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, I mean, we fundamentally have a different way of remunerating the two committees anyway, and that, and whilst that remains so, one is paid for attendance as well as a stipend for the co-chairs. So it's impossible to reconcile those two whilst you still have to have those two fundamentals. So we'll never be able to bring them together. That's not a criticism, it's just a statement of fact that whilst one is paid on attendance, the other one is paid as stipends, you can't resolve those two.
Thank you, Councillor. Tanya Hopmans, kia ora.
Kia ora, everyone. Sorry, my camera's not working, but that's probably a blessing. But so I'm just wanting to, I guess, touch on Councillor Curtin's query. I think going back to what Pierre was saying, the two committees have different roles, are established differently, and the remuneration review is set out in the terms of reference for the RPC, and that's referred to in the report. So they have a very different basis for which they are reviewed. So if there was a desire to look at comparisons, you'd have to look at the terms of reference for the RPC versus what is required for the Māori Committee. So they are, Pierre's exactly right, they are two separate, different reviews based on different things.
Thank you, Tanya. Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Harding.
Thank you, Chair. Probably best dealt with this as a comment, which is essentially, but if a comment's taken on board, then there'll be a slight change to the recommendation. And it's simply just to clarify, we have a recommendation in the paper from staff that we adopt, and it's at paragraph 2, that we adopt the midpoint of the ranges that we presented with, but that hasn't followed through to the recommendation. So I'm simply going to suggest that we can fix that by, in para 6 of the recommendations, line 2, becomes committee at the midpoint of the range recommended by Strategic Pays, and the rest can stand. So that would give complete clarity and direction to staff. So
and that's the same for 7 also?
7.2, yes.
7.2?
Yep, well picked up. Yep.
Thank you. Have you got that, Leanne? Thank you. So you'd like to move that. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Hokianga? Thank you. Any other speakers? There are none. Okay, that's on the table. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. If we move on to item 8, the Audit and Risk Sub-committee review. Kia ora, Susie. Do we have Stephanie with us as well? No. Okay, no, that's fine. So we have the item here with many additions made to the terms of reference. But yeah, I'll let you lead out on this one, Susie, and we've got a few questions.
Yep,
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you.
Okay, so thank you. A bit of background on this. In the May Audit and Risk Committee, the members requested a review be undertaken of the committee itself, primarily around the terms of reference for that committee and how that aligned to best practice using the Office of the Auditor General Audit Committee meetings. That review was undertaken by Doug Craig. He is an external public sector specialist, so to speak, RDC Group, and has come back with various recommendations. Now, primarily in the executive summary, they are to outline lift that committee to council, being a direct report to council, not a subcommittee. They're recommending that meet quarterly instead of 6 monthly. Recommending that we have an independent chair of that committee. Currently, we only have an independent member, not a chair. And also recommending that we have an ability to get a further independent given the current times we are in, and also the ability to appoint specialists as and when required. Those recommendations do align to the OAG good practice and outlined in the paper. The other part of this paper is to take the opportunity to seek approval to recommend that the current independent be appointed as the chair, effective for the next meeting. Primarily, the current independent has been on board since September 2021, has been providing valuable challenge and feedback to date, and we feel, given the time and certainty and need to move on in this space, that we look to directly appoint her into that role rather than do an external appointment committee process, which could take up to 4 to 5 months.
Thank you, Susie. Questions or clarifications in the paper in the terms of reference? Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Thank you, Susie. Just a quick question around the second independent. Do you have a view about an appropriate process for considering or looking at that second independent?
I haven't considered a process as such. I think should this go through, the committee should form a view as to the timing of that. We just wanted to put that on the table now, given the opportunity. It is quite normal, I would like to add, that some of these larger regional risk and audit committees do have 2 independents. Auckland, for example, has 3. But certainly Hastings have just gone into that situation as well.
Thank you. Look, and just thank you for that. And that aligns with my own thinking in that it seems rational to give, assuming we adopt a new Stephanie as the independent chair, then we give her the opportunity and that committee the opportunity to look at that, given that they have. The idea is that that's skills-based, looking at what's there, and we have choices around both independent members and technical specialists. But I know Councillor Williams has some questions that he may or may not have resolved about the standing of this committee, whether it's a committee of the whole or a committee reporting to a committee of the whole.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, would you like to ask that question? Prompted by Councillor Harding.
Yes, it would seem probably appropriate that I do in light of that introduction. I was mulling over whether I would, but my reading of the paper, in other words, the independent review that we got, is slightly different to where the terms of reference and recommendation have arrived at. The paper, if you look at 5.1 of the covering paper, it says that the Audit and Risk Committee, the Risk and Audit Committee would be a full committee of council. And the proposal seems to be that it's a subcommittee that reports to the council. Does it matter? Is there some conscious active thinking about the difference between those two things, or is there a misalignment between the advice and what we're doing?
Thank you, Martin. That's a mistake. So it's not, the proposal is to have the Audit and Risk Committee directly report to council, but not necessarily a full suite of councillors on that committee. Is that the right term to use?
Yeah. You're
Right.
correct in what the assumption of this council was, that it was to report directly to the council.
That is my
No, that's all right. It's
That's
actually,
okay.
no, it's a fair reflection of
Yeah.
what it's actually not a mistake in the sense that, as I'm reading it, the independent report that we received actually says OAG guidance and our own experience suggests its profile should be lifted to the status of a full committee of council. I'm just really wanting some assurance that it is considered prudent in light of everything that's led to this point to do this through a direct report to the council rather than.
Yes.
Are we safe in that structure?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. My next question was around independence. The terms of reference, although the recommendations and the motions don't say that we would appoint a second independent, the terms of reference says up to two independents. I guess I'm socialising. It can be framed as a question whether we shouldn't be putting the words up to, replacing them with a minimum of. And I appreciate that it would take some time to recruit a second person, and you wouldn't just headlong rush into that without thinking about what they're bringing to the table. But would there be any merit in changing the words up to a minimum of?
I have no objection personally from an officer point of
Sounds like we have an objection.
view.
Well, my suggestion would be to let the committee reform, if you like, or it's currently formed, but form under the independent chair, have the committee consider where it's at, and if there needs to be an amendment to the terms of reference from there, then that can be done.
But I guess Chair, my substantive concern is if the best practice advice is that we have a good loading of independent directors and more than one, the terms of reference that we're signing off as a council which says up to is not consistent with that advice. That's my concern.
Okay. Leanne, you have
Sorry,
a
through
query?
you, Chair, just from a governance perspective, I would have a problem with a minimum of, because that leaves it open to what's the maximum. If you wanted it to be more than two, you could say up to three, up to four. That number would be something that you could choose, but I wouldn't normally go with a minimum of.
Okay, well, that's sitting there as a possibility.
Just say
Councillor Harding?
that if we adopted Councillor Williams' approach, then I think the committee would find itself ultra vires until it actually had a second independent. So it's not really satisfactory.
Okay. But are you comfortable that that's something that the committee will address when it forms under this new terms of reference, Councillor Williams? As a point to...
Not entirely,
Yes, okay.
but I might just say as much in discussing the paper.
Okay. Councillor Curtin?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and Ms Young will be conscious of the risks in report writing as a consequence of this paper, given the eagle eyes around the table.
Some.
I'm happy to move the recommendations, Madam Chair, with comments on two items. Number 5, before moving, I wondered whether it was worthwhile just confirming with the 4 nominees who are currently on the committee to confirm that they wish to continue before we commit them to that. If there's any objection from any of them, and alternatively other members of council that may wish to join this very august and powerful committee. I'm sure they'll be lining up for that. But subject.
Should we deal with that now?
Yeah.
So we'll do one at a time. So current committee members are comfortable to stay as committee members? Yes,
Aye.
thank you. Are there any interests in new committee members? There are none,
Happy
we've
to
settled
step
that.
aside if someone wants to. The second point, Madam Chair, is 6.1, and I'd be very happy to nominate Councillor Zan Harding for the position of Deputy Chair, if he's willing to accept that, or if there are any other nominees, but...
I'll second it.
Second for that. So, on that basis, Madam Chair, I'm happy to move recommendations 1 to 7 on the understanding that 6.1, the nominee is the only nominee, Councillor Hawke, for that role.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just circle back.
I'm not sure whether this is a point of
Harding.
order, but I just wanted to just table an issue on the terms of reference, the proposed amended terms of reference.
Yes.
And it's just on the quorum. So at the moment, as the committee would be constituted, there'll be 4 council members and an independent chair, so total 5. At the moment, the proposal is for a quorum of 4. Just wanted to test with the council whether they felt that that was important, or whether for practical operations reasons that we could drop that back safely to a quorum of 3 out of 5.
Can I just first ask Susie if you have any extension to that? No? No? Okay. So that's more than 50%. Leanne?
Yep, sorry, or I could propose another option, could be a majority including the independent chair, for example.
I like that.
So a majority of
Well,
5 or 6.
Without wanting to get ahead of myself, that may derail the committee in the event that the chair wasn't there and the deputy would be a lame deputy. But anyway, I can live with that.
Yeah, Councillor Keating?
It probably we circle back to Councillor Williams's point around numbers, and I would suggest if we take a permissive approach, that is for both the quorum and the independent, that we say for the independent that they up to 2. That gives us some flexibility, covers off your point, Councillor. And then on the second point, I think from my experience over the years, there has been a number of times when we wouldn't have met the quorum at 4. So if I can suggest we go with 3, including the chair, we're reasonably comfortable.
Okay. Yep. All right. Excellent. So what I've recorded here for our resolutions is that there be a correction to report directly to the council, not be a committee of council. I've also recorded here up to 2 independents. Yeah. A committee of council, but not all the councillors on there. That there be 3 plus a chair as the quorum. That's where I've got to with all the amendments to that 1 to 6.
I'm not sure that quite solves the problem.
Just 3, 3 including the chair?
Yes.
3 including the chair, sorry.
Again, the question would be if the chair's not available, but everybody else is, then you wouldn't have a quorum. So not quite there yet.
So it could be 3 including the chair or deputy chair?
Yeah. That's it. Thank you. We got there.
So there's someone running the meeting? And then we have the nomination for Zan Harding as the deputy chair, and appoints Stephanie Malloy as the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee. Okay, we're good there? Kapoi. So we've got a mover, and can I please have a seconder? Councillor Hokianga. Any more comment?
Just very briefly, Madam Chair, sorry to do that to you. Because it's, I believe that my words around this being an important committee, I believe is a true statement, that it carries out a significant and important part of the council's business, and even more so in our current environment where we've faced a high level of risk and experienced what we've experienced. And I think the committee's moved around over the years and has been sort of pillar to post in terms of its efficacy and ability to get and report back to council. And I'm hoping this configuration, we can settle on this, have it really focused in those terms of reference about what its job is, help us get there significantly. I think in the last term we were all over the paddock, covering off far too many activities and events to the extent where we really didn't focus. And more than any time in our history, I think we need to focus on risk and manage it well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. If there are no other speakers, all those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Thank you, councillors, for working through that one. We are on to item 9, the electoral system for local government elections. Ka kite, Councillor Hokianga. So who would like to present this paper?
Just checking with either Desi or Leanne.
Leanne?
I can do that.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Councillor. I have put this forward because it's time to make that decision again. I can just let you take the paper as read. If anyone has any questions, I will attempt to answer them.
Okay, questions or clarifications for Leanne?
Just got a comment, Chair. I think two compelling things in support of recommendation in respect of FPP. One is it's now been adopted by all other councils in the Greater Hawke's Bay area, and it would be extraordinarily confusing if we adopted something different. And the other is, I think, notwithstanding its imperfections, people understand it, and that's a really important thing in a time of low voter turnout and that sort of thing.
Good points, thank you, Councillor McIntosh. So we have recommendations in front of us. We have 1, 2, either 3 or 4. Can I please have a mover for either 3 or 4?
Move 3.
Happy to move 3.
I'll second 3.
Second that. Any speaking opportunities coming here, Councillor Williams?
Just to echo Councillor McIntosh, I don't think the current system is sufficiently broken. While there might be some wisdom and perfection of the STV system, now is not the time to be burdening our community with yet another conversation about this. We've just had a full representation review recently, and that's having time to bed in and prove its worth. There's a heck of a lot going on out there without this, so I'm with Councillor McIntosh.
Thank you. Any other speakers? There are none. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 10, we have the councillors' remuneration and allowances. Would you like to lead that, Leanne?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, it's pretty self-explanatory. I've attached the parts of the determination that relate to this council. And there was only one change, and that was to the vehicle allowance. So unless anybody has any questions?
Questions or clarifications? It's quite straightforward.
Happy to move.
Have been moved. And second, any speakers? There are none. Oh, Councillor Harding.
Yeah, just very briefly, like I just want to acknowledge my gratitude for being paid to do this job. But this is a big job for everyone, particularly in a post-cyclone context. I can happily accept a no pay rise. I just hope that we manage to maintain our biscuits as we go forward and look at our revised post-cyclone budgets. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, and we just, there's a little mistake on the paper, 22 to 23 on table, but I'm sure that's just a, glitch.
Chair, could I
So
just-
wrong year,
Should read 23 to 24.
yes.
Chair, can I just make a brief reflection, not in reply to that, but just to note as mover that in an age where our communities are increasingly stressed by the rates burden falling on them, I'm glad that this remuneration setting hasn't increased our wages and that we're not imposing any additional part of that burden through continuing our work at last year's rate.
Thank you. Good point. Okay, all those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. So we've got the interim groups of activities. Next, who would like to lead out on this item?
Our CFO, Chris Comer, is going to take elected members through this item. It's really an early look at where we're heading with end of year in advance of annual report coming up in the next couple of months. So it's not a final position, it's a working document really.
Yes.
It also has some information around potential carry forwards, and again, there's no final list of potential carry forwards to come before you at this stage. And indeed, the extent of that list is yet to be worked through, but it was to give you an idea of some of what may come over the subsequent months.
Kia ora, thank you.
I'll hand over to Chris to take you through the item.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, as our standard quarterly reporting that is coming through, that gives us our sort of operating position look at the organisation. That doesn't include all of the reserves and rates and stuff like that, which will come through in our final end of year position that we do. Looking at the overall position for the full year, our operating position was about $6.5 million adverse to budget. That is principally driven by investment income, with the HBRIC dividend being down and a year-end revaluation of leasehold property actually giving some revaluation losses, unrealised losses on those properties compared to the previous year. Our business as usual expenditure was about $16 million favourable, but that was more offset by our cyclone expenditure, less revenue, incurring us about $16 million worth of additional expenditure. It is to be noted that there is likely to be more revenue coming through in association with some of that expenditure from NEMA and insurance in the next financial year. On our capital side, again, capital is about $1.4 million favourable, with the $13.6 million of cyclone capital expenditure being slightly more than offset by business as usual capital expenditure on flood protection and control being a lot less than was originally budgeted for obvious reasons. As Nick mentioned, carry forwards are mentioned in this paper. There are obviously a number of large underspends that have happened during the year. We are working through all of those at the moment in association with the loan impacts and the reserves impacts. Those that have specified funding, where like targeted rates, or that where there is a reserve allowance available to actually carry them forward, we will be bringing back for approval to do that. Our difficulty that we're working through at the moment is those items that are funded through general funding. Given the amount of cyclone expenditure that we've had that is using up a lot of that general funding for this year, we don't have the amount of reserve available to carry forward. So we are working through the implications of that at the moment, which is why we can't finalise the carry forwards now, but we'll be coming back with a paper to Corporate and Strategic on the 20th of September once we've finalised those reserves numbers. The only other thing I would mention is that in addition to that Corporate and Strategic paper on the 20th of September, on the 11th of October, we'll be coming back to Council with the draft financial statements, so the full financial statements for the year. And then, any questions?
Thank you, Chris. Questions for Chris? Councillor Kuta?
Just the one, Chris, thank you very much for the report. It's yet another opus that the team's produced, so well done. Can I just take you to paragraph 28, the table in paragraph 28, the investment income for the year being 62% of budget, a downside of nearly $8 million. Now, can you remind me, did we adjust the current annual plan investment income downwards to reflect the reality? Did we do that in the plan or not? Can't recall.
We brought that down by $2.5 million, did we?
23-24, there's been no adjustments.
Not for 23-24, so that's been left at the full level of the investment income that was expected for that year. So there wasn't an adjustment made for HBRIC, but there's the hope that some of our other investment returns might come back, like the revaluation we've lost on the property.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the assessment was made that for the 23-24 financial year, we still did not have enough information as to whether we would actually get losses on other investments or or the finalisation of how our age brick performance was going to go in the dividend there to actually make a change. So leaving it at the LTP year 3 level was the most prudent at that stage.
With a number like that, though, we face quite a significant, we come from behind very substantially, don't we, in terms of net position for, what was our deficit position for current year? What was our budget deficit?
Are you talking about investment income
No, in total with the impact of the investment income.
The budgeted deficit, what, for 23, 24 or 24?
Current year, yeah, 23, 24.
The budget with the overall funding impact statement is to come back down to a net zero position. Are you looking for the annual plan?
Yeah, no, don't worry, I'll take it offline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Harding.
Just to read my mind. Thank you, Chair. Look, thank you, Chris, for that really helpful paper. I guess what I'm just trying to explore and understand is operating in deficit and how we deal with that from a procedural and a governance and a discretion's point of view, because this is unusual space we find ourselves in, and your paper reflects well that it's overwhelmingly as a result of cyclone-related costs, and in particular a deficit between the costs that we incur on behalf of the community and those that we can claim back through NEMA and insurances and those kind of things. And that's the cold hard reality of where we find ourselves. And to have a net position of $6.5 million behind when the net, against the net loss of about $15.5 million on my calculations, the losses from the response means that there's been a lot of economies or savings or deferred expenses elsewhere which have got us to a much better position than we would have been otherwise. So that's excellent. I'm just looking for both an assurance and understanding how where the whole of the Local Government Act, and specifically Section 100, as we've learned through our budgeting process, is predicated on the idea of not operating in budgeting to run at least to break even. So how do we, and our rating is based on this and rating apportionments. So once we achieve a loss, how is that have all our systems stood up and the delegations are sufficient, or is there anything else that we should do to support our chief executive in that? First question. And second question is, how is that loss then funded? And is that different to how otherwise we would have set out to?
So I guess when you look at an operating adverse position to budget here, and yet we've spent more than we have received in, at the moment we're funding that through loan funding, so we're getting other cash in. So in terms of being able to pay our debts or have a cash, we've got the cash there to be able to do that. That obviously sets us up with a loan that needs to be repaid going forward, and we need to start building that into our LTP process as we go forward into there. Some of the checks that are part of all of our planning process, annual reports and the long-term plans, are about the level of loan funding that we can actually have compared to our revenue and rates that we're going forward. And so they become a very critical thing for us to look at to ensure that we've got the affordability going forward, that we don't actually extend ourselves too much into there. When we start heading towards some of those loan limits, those are the times that we've got to say, well, either we've got to cut expenditure or we've got to increase revenue. Increasing revenue is increasing the rate burden on ratepayers or finding other subsidies from central government lobbying for paying for some of the costs or other things, or having a good hard look at the things that we're actually doing. All of those things through the LTP process that we're starting at the moment are being put on the table to look through, and we'll be coming back to you through all of those workshops to assess that, so to assess what is the best course of action for us going forward.
Okay, thank you. That answers about half my question. I think, based on a previous discussion, I think the Chief Executive is going to come back to us just on the point of view of operating discretions to make sure that the financial discretions are still all line up.
Yep, no, happy to do that.
Thank you.
Di, kia ora, Di.
Kia ora, and thank you, Chris, for the paper. Could you just give a bit more information on para 19.3, where you've noted that the coastal hazards contributions from the TAs is reduced. Why are those reduced, please?
They were reduced because there was a minimal level of expenditure so that we didn't spend as much as we were expecting to, and so therefore the contributions were not needed as great as what was originally budgeted.
So that's a carry forward matter for those councils?
Potentially.
Potentially, yeah.
Potentially, yeah.
So it'll still be due at when that work actually progresses?
Yes, we would be looking to recover the full extent of the expenditure in relation from each of those councils, so we just hadn't spent as much to recover from them.
Got it.
Thank you. There are no other questions. Councillor McIntosh, happy to move the paper? Receive, and Councillor Foley second. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
I look forward to senior corporate and strategic, and we can have an in-depth carry forwards conversation. Thank you. Moving on, team, we've got our reports from our committees. So unfortunately, Mr. Paku is not here, but oh, he's online. Mm-hmm. Oh, kia ora, Mike. Kia ora. Hey, we're up to the kia ora from the Māori Committee. Yep. Would you like to just provide an overview before questions?
For the most part, I'm happy to take the papers to read. I think the one thing that stuck out for me, and I'd just like to thank our incoming CEO, Nick, in regards to his willingness to have a offline conversation with our committee prior to us starting our committee meeting. We just felt it would be a good opportunity to have a bit more free and frank conversation, just like what the councils do themselves prior to a council committee meeting. I think that was the one thing that jumped out for me. We've dealt with the remuneration. That was the other big thing that popped out. And of course, COVID is never ever, the cyclones recovery is never far from anybody's thoughts. Just, I think that'd be my summary of the committee, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Are there other questions or comments before we move to receive the report from the Māori Committee? There are none. I'm happy to move. Can I have a seconder, please?
Yep.
Councillor Foley. All those who agree, say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Kia ora. And moving on to the Transport Committee, Councillor Williams, would you like to provide a short overview of your meeting?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I understand I have 5 minutes understanding orders in which to speak. I'll see how I go. Yeah. Look, the only reason I raised that it is transport is a hugely significant part of our response and recovery context at the moment, and some of the infrastructure that was smashed to bits in the cyclone is a lifeline for our communities, rural and urban. And so there's a lot going on in this context at the moment. I guess one of the things I wanted to touch on is we had a workshop focused like a laser on our next regional land transport plan, through which we bid for Crown funding. We obviously need to align that with the regional recovery plan, and we're taking steps to ensure that's the case, but it's our single biggest lever to extract money out of the National Land Transport Fund. And we workshopped on a priority really on resilience and recovery, in the sense of, ensuring our rural communities are effectively connected, and that when we build back better, we ensure that we have an efficient transport system, that we introduce into all new infrastructure capacity for multimodal, and that our new infrastructure aligns with other hazard systems. The examples of bridges that are able to withstand wood, debris, that sort of thing. And also putting communities at our centre, at the centre of all thinking, rather than communities just being places we drive past and wave at. So it really is very much focused on ensuring investment in that resilience and recovery context. In the midst of all of that, we've just had landed on us the government policy statement, and we had to sort of set our policy direction for the land transport plan so that then the technical advisory group could populate the specific projects that would align with that vision in the absence of the draft government policy statement that funding would be allocated in line with. So whilst somewhat shooting in the dark, I think I'm happy to report that the very strong resilience, multimodal approach of the government policy statement is in the same place as where we got to. There was some understandable frustration, I think, from some of the rural TAs, Central Hawke's Bay and Wairoa, at the next conversation we had, which was around our emissions chapter, emissions reduction plan transport chapter. But necessarily we did need to descend into that arena because we must both ensure that our transport system is resilient to the effects of climate change, but equally not adding to the burden of it. So I don't see those two things as being mutually exclusive. And as I've said, the predominant focus is very much on resilience and recovery in the priorities of the next transport plan. And then in the midst of all of that, we have a lot of electioneering going on about major transport projects up and down the country, and getting New Zealand back on track with roads. And so we've had both parties commit to an expressway, which is fantastic news at one level for Hawke's Bay. That planning was in place years ago for a 4-lane expressway, but we have to really think about how that sits with our vision of a multimodal system. And I know from my point of view, speaking for myself, my preference was always to have a multimodal expressway rather than just 4 lanes for cars. Is it 3 and 1 for something else? Could we do something more imaginative about that? So it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes down post-election in line with the government policy statement, which is this government's put out, which is more diverse and I think future-proofed in its thinking than just building roads for cars. That's really all I wanted to say. A lot happening. I am very, very conscious of where our rural communities are at, and they are literally so critically dependent on these routes which have been severed, and we must do something about it.
Thank you, Councillor.
Madam Chair, I've got a point of order. I'd like to ask for an extension of Councillor Williams' speaking time for another 10 minutes.
Well, I was going to ask him a question, which I'm sure that will provide more speaking opportunity. I just want to endorse the actions of the Transport Committee in terms of the emission reduction targets within the Transport Plan. We know with the Climate Action Committee that that's been a bit of an uphill battle. But we will get through it. So just support all the work that you're doing in the Transport Committee to contribute to that emissions reduction plan. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're certainly going to take it off that ball. Chair, the one thing I did want to add is that the key challenge to all of this is funding. And unless New Zealand Inc. is prepared to have an honest conversation about the need to fund our transport infrastructure properly, we are just not going to have a climate resilient transport network anywhere. We are not going to have the maintenance deficit corrected, and we are not going to have public transport at a level which our communities deserve. So I do hope that conversation post-election is an honest one.
Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, I think these comments are probably initially directed at the chair of the Regional Transport Committee, and apologies in advance for any mum-eye, any hurt that might be involved, so all with
You
good
can have 10
intent.
minutes.
So what I'm trying to resolve in my mind is the tension between a well-crafted regional transport policy with multimodal transport options and resilience and climate adaptation and mitigation in mind versus political, election promises around simply double laning an expressway. And it's not that I don't acknowledge that there are issues of constraint, particularly at the bottom, the coastal end of that expressway, and some of those relate specifically to the challenges that the horticultural sector, the processing sector in particular, finds around some of those connections. But what we really need out of this is a regional transport committee that stands up for regional priorities. And I just hope and advocates for those. And if a regional transport committee can't do that against a tide of poor alignment from central government or from political parties, then what's the point of having a regional transport committee? And I would just commend that committee and its chair to be as vigorous in pursuit of a good outcome for that tension and for the good of our regional community, and pursue that as vigorously as they have pursued the 80-kilometre speed limit on the Napier Taupo Road. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harding, for your views. Councillor McIntosh.
A bit of a subset of that. I was interested to see the deputation you had from the cycling interest, and it feels to me as if we've spent a great deal of money on biking in Hawke's Bay. The cycle trail part of that really successful. The rest of it not so successful if you take an anecdotal view of the amount of bikes you see on, albeit urban roads and that sort of thing. And there are cities in the world that are extraordinarily successful with biking, and in those cities, bikes rule. So we're not going to leap from where we are now to a situation where bikes rule, but nevertheless, most of Napier and all of Hastings is flat, so we should be really good at it, but we're not. We don't get on the bike. But I'd be interested to know if the committee had any experience or understanding of areas in the world that have sort of similar situations to us that actually do pretty well with cycling. Because it feels, in Hawke's Bay, it's a great climate. The urban areas in particular are flat. Realise that's not so much our patch, but I feel we should be doing better than we are.
Thank you. Councillor?
Yeah,
Would you like to try and answer that one?
I think a double wheel has been handed to me. One of the punchlines I would say is read Bay Buzz in October. I've written an article which really covers both of those bases. One of the first things I said in it was that I wrote the word radical on the board at the beginning of our workshop and said, this is no longer the time to defer, it's now. If we don't do it now, forget it. We have to be radical. So whether we can, through being radical, influence a central government decision that renders us otherwise impotent as to the nature of the investment in the corridor, I'm not sure, but we will try. And you can be sure that part of our planning for the future of Hawke's Bay is purpose-based, targeted, dedicated cycling roads. That's where we're at the moment. This has to go through public consultation. Others may have different views in the community, but there is a very strong, I think, and clear consensus around our council table, within Hastings and Napier at least, that we need to do better for our cycling community. And as far as I'm concerned, we will.
One of the strongest submissions was horse trekking.
And horse trekking, yes.
Thank you,
Thank
Chair,
you.
for that time.
If there are no other comments, would you like to move that we receive the paper? Councillor Williams?
Aye. Yes, I would.
And would you like to second, Councillor McIntosh? All those who agree say aye. All those against, carried. Kia ora. Charlie, would you lead us out on the report from Clifton to Tangoio Coastal Hazard Strategy Joint Committee?
Yeah, kia ora tātou. So the Coastal Clifton Tangoio Coastal Hazard Strategy Committee met on the 11th of August, and bearing in mind that it was actually cancelled a couple of times during the year for obvious reasons, so the last meeting before that was in May. And just to reiterate, in May really was setting out the initial terms of reference for this committee. Now that it's combined underneath the regional council, and it has been ongoing for a number of years. So on the 11th of August, we did have our committee, and as you can see, these are the points raised here. And I could add that the meeting was well led by Councillor Hayley Brown from the Napier City Council, as our chair was away at the time. So, but the first agenda item was the Coastal Hazards Interim Response Plan, and it's interim because it's only just received the terms of reference. So before that, there was a joint committee in place of the three councils involved, and they had been working on a strategic plan. So the interim plan was just to really point about guiding the councils involved. There's three main points: guiding the councils involved in giving information, steering us in the right direction, and trying to marry it up with the current strategy. So there wasn't you see the next couple of points are really about the strategy that was put in place and where we're at and then analysing it. Basically, just briefly, the plan is pretty much going according to initial planning, bearing in mind that the framework for this committee or scope of the analysis reaches from 2015 through to 2120. So it's a 105-year period, and the initial strategies are really about from here to sort of halfway. So we're talking about like Whirinaki, Bayview, West Shore, for example. They're still opting for the status quo, which is beach renourishment. Worth looking at maybe 2065 having a managed retreat. Pandora is also included in there, but goes with storm surge barrier 2045 with a 2065 again considering retreat. Oh, sorry, yeah, managed retreat. Homoana and Awanga, they're going for groins and beach renourishment preferred. But the previous report wasn't quite available to actually sort that out. But so the plan is still a work in progress for that part of it. Clifton, completion of a seawall may be justified, but managed retreat is probably too expensive in that case. So it's a toss-up as what will happen in relation to the value of existing assets that are there. That become exposed or could be exposed. So Clive, actually information wasn't available either, but one of the points with this analysis of the current strategic plan is that they are still a bit behind in their work, but the plan is out to be notified fully to the public by August, 12 months time, August 24, yeah. So the project manager's working on all of that. And as you heard before in the finance bit, we're underspent last year, and hopefully that'll be transferred over until the new financial year. So a couple of other things that maybe our project manager's got to deal with. Mātauranga Māori plan is currently being worked through with Tanya and the Regional Planning Committee. There are also monitoring of the coastal area is a really big task for the future, and that's still being worked through. Managed retreat, as you can all appreciate that, yeah. Current level 3 category is like an indicator of maybe where we're heading in the future. But that's going to be another big question to be asked of all the councils and who's responsible. Yeah, so it's was a good day. But it was about, I'm looking at the options currently before them and are they still viable? But the final plan won't be out until August next year.
Thank you, Councillor Lambert. Are there any questions? Summary, thank you. Would you like to move?
I would love to move.
Thank you.
That'd be
And Councillor Foley second. All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Kia ora. We move on to the report from Climate Action Joint Committee, and I was away, so Councillor Hayley Brown chaired that meeting, and Councillor Zan Harding was present. So we'll hand that over to you, Zan. Kia ora.
All right, Chair. Look, we can take the paper as read. I just want to highlight a couple of points that are, some of which are embedded in there and some of which are not. So the committees make great strides. It's not obvious, but the challenges of putting in terms of reference together that all councils in Hawke's Bay could sign up to should not be underestimated, especially because the issues that we're confronting our society around climate change are very challenging, and they don't affect all parts of our region equally. They also go to the heart of a number of issues that the region and individual parts of the region faced before the cyclone, and almost all more so after they just further highlight the problems that we have across our region, sorry, as a result of the cyclone. So we have a group of people coming representing quite different communities with a different balance of issues relating to climate, adaptation and mitigation. And so to corral all those together and focus them around a central job of work for that committee around a regional emissions reduction plan is highly challenging. And we need to engage the whole of the community in that journey, and it needs to be fully, we need, as part of that, tangata whenua to be fully engaged. And the cold hard reality is we've only just got to the point of having the 5 councils on board with a challenging task ahead of them. It's still a work in progress and a matter of prioritisation for tangata whenua to get fully on board. And so we must walk before we run. And so it's been a very good judgment on the part of the chair and the deputy chair of this committee to work on relationships within the committee and with tangata whenua community before we start plucking figures out of the air and trying to trying to build them into a set of commitments and targets for the region. Right. And these are we can't regulate for this. So these are guidelines and aspirations and targets to achieve as opposed to commitments. But if we look at, to do that properly, we need to recognise that 60% of our climate footprint comes from the primary sector. We have a very robust but yet challenging forestry sector in our region, so that's a blessing and a challenge at the same time. And then, so that's we have benefits of vast offsets at the moment from forestry, but we actually have to look at our gross emissions. 60% farming, 20% transport, 10% stationary energy are the top 3. We have to be able to engage in those. We have to be able to talk to those parts of the community. However, we have to recognise there's real challenges in the timing of those conversations at the moment. We have an ETS under review. We have the potential of biodiversity credits being developed in the wings, and we have a failed He Waka Eke Noa arrangement, and we have a general election. So where we find ourselves practically with that committee at the moment is relationship building and building up to a point where realistically we can actually do some real powerful work once some of those key elements settle. So whilst there has been some criticism about inaction or relative lack of progress with that committee, the cold hard reality is, on the one hand, we're stymied, but on the other hand, if we don't get that boilerplate in place, we will fail. So I just want to give you, as fellow councillors and the community, confidence that actually we are on track, but this is really, really challenging work, and we're doing the best we can with those constraints and the constraints that all parties are under in terms of the workload between now and the end of the year, or at least post-election, to be continuing to build a base for success. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harding. Well put. Are there any questions or comments? There are none. Councillor Harding, you'd like to move?
Yes, I would, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh to second. All those agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Kia ora, thank you. Look, we've got strategic projects report. Would you like to lead us out, Nick?
Happy to, Chair. My suggestion is we take the paper as read as an update. If elected members have got specific questions, we'll do our best to answer them now. If some of them require some more detail, we'll go away and come back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So who do we have? We have Anna. Congratulations, Anna, your first council meeting in the GM position. We've got Susie. Unfortunately, we don't have Chris, who's...
John Kingsford, we've given Chris back because I'm just on his way.
Oh, okay, thank you. And Katrina is not present.
Oh, no, she's away,
Okay.
I'm afraid.
That's fine, okay. So we're just knowing who's in the room. Do we have any questions for staff on this item? Councillor Curtin and then Councillor Williams. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to get a sense, I'm not sure whether this question fits with this agenda item 16, or which is strategic projects, or the next one is 17, which is significant organisational activities. My question relates to the Hawke's Bay 10-year hazard research plan, which obviously encompasses a great deal of energy and output in terms of research. This is something we do an update every so often, and it lists a whole range of projects that we have undertaken or undertaking. Can we have a report as to where that hazard research plan is and progress against the priorities set in it?
Can you direct us to that item?
Well, that's my problem.
It's not in the paper.
It's not in the paper.
Point of order.
There's this document, the 10-year hazards plan,
Oh, GNS.
which specifies HBRC as the lead in conducting this research. So my assumption that it's a strategic thing and ought to sit within our strategic priorities, strategic projects reporting framework, but alternatively, if it doesn't fit there, it ought to fit in the significant organisational activities. Can anyone help me with that, or is it something that
Is it something we can take offline?
I think it might be one we need to take offline.
Can we
take it? Just have
Can
a
we take
chat
it
afterwards?
offline?
Yep, happy to.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, a question about asset management, John. So the Heretaunga Flood Protection Scheme, the Kanoa funding, works falling outside the funding window, will not be able to proceed. What have we lost that was envisaged? And what does that mean in practical terms for our ambition for 500 to 1, etc., for that scheme, and or, how does that relate to the carry forwards conversation?
Thank you for that question. And there's multiple questions in there, actually, isn't there? So obviously we raised that as a risk on schedule and budget. The main program of work was largely put on hold, both in terms of the Heretaunga Flood Control Scheme level of service upgrades and gravel extraction post-cyclone. Gravel extraction has continued sporadically throughout the period since then, and our Ngataroa stop bank upgrade recommenced in July and is almost finished. It'll be finished next month. So we have been able to continue to do work. On the 1st of June, Chris and I went to Wellington and presented to Kanoa a proposal or a request to extend the deadline on the current tranche of funding, which is November 2023, so in a few months' time. And we also put up a proposal for the next tranche of funding. So we have not yet had confirmation around those requests. We had a lot of requests for additional information and confirmation around what we were proposing there. There was some clarification around the program of work proposed under the IRG Kanoa work is very, very separate to any other funding coming from government at this point in time. So our ambitions will never change, but we are still waiting for confirmation on that funding. The suggestion that I've taken out of the follow-up questions is that we will possibly get an extension to the deadline on tranche 1 funding, and or it'll be incorporated under tranche 2 along with additional funding for the next stage of that original program of work.
It doesn't look like we may have missed out altogether.
That is what I'm taking out of it, but obviously we can't take that to the bank. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, it might be a question for you, John, or it might be a question for us all, but the project summary for IRG, it talks about upgrading flood protection assets across 4 schemes to increase flood protection across the scheme from 1 in 100 to 1 in 500. And so I'm not sure whether that or is the source of public conception or misconception that we are committed to going to 1 in 500 across all of those schemes. My understanding is we're not, and we're not. We shouldn't. It's not helpful to have reports that suggest we are.
I'm just trying to collect my thoughts as I come up with an answer, so I'm rambling on. I guess the agreed program of work on which the funding is based is for an upgrade from 1 in 100 to 1 in 500 year flood level protection. That work and our conversations with Kanoa, that will be informed by the technical reviews on those flood control schemes that are now underway. That may mean that we lift to 1 in 500 level. It may mean some other form of betterment, I beg your pardon. But we really are reliant on those technical reviews to land what betterment looks like. So at that point, maybe that program work pivots or becomes a separate program of work.
Okay, so maybe I didn't express myself clearly enough. It's unclear, and I'm left unclear as to whether the 1 in 500 relates to some specific reaches in those schemes or whether that was, and there is still an institutional commitment, whether through building stop banks higher or through other mechanisms to achieve 1 in 500 across that network.
Thanks for the clarification. Certainly pre-cyclone, it was a commitment to raising the level of stop banks through the entire scheme. The pace at which that could be completed depends on the level of funding, and obviously with the Kanoa co-funding, it can progress at a much greater rate than if it was solely funded through the scheme. So yes, that was our commitment prior to the cyclone. We've been pretty open about the fact that just lifting stop banks to a 1 in 500 level may not be the right answer given our experiences through Cyclone Gabriel. So the technical reviews will inform what the future of betterment will look like, whether it's 1 in 500 everywhere, in some reaches, or something different.
Okay, ideally perhaps we could rephrase that project summary so I don't forget this conversation and ask the same question in 2 months' time.
I think through you, Chair, if we change the project summary to be a little bit less definitive, because it sounds like there's an investigation phase going on, and then there's a confirmation of funding and then delivery if depending on that investigation phase. So we'll reword it slightly.
And certainly, I think the funding is prefaced on the fact that it is lifting everything to 1 in 500. So if the technical reviews demonstrate that that's not the right answer, then that program will conclude, and a different program will take its place. And the question of funding will ensue from there.
So just for the sake of ultimate clarity, as a group of councillors, I think I can fairly say that we are under the presumption that not only is that, based on our current understanding, 1 in 500 across our network financially unachievable for us, but also in the light of the experience of the cyclone, probably not the best way of looking at things. And a lot of your comments have reflected that anyway, but that's our understanding.
I think that's pretty on point. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Any other questions? There are none. We might just move straight on to, and we'll receive the reports at the end, but moving on to significant organisational activities through to September. Got the same team up here. Are there any questions on that item? Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John, I just wonder I can take you to item 1.
Starting at 1.
Starting at the top, eh?
And can you give us half an hour on? The report is somewhat brief, to say the least. That item plus item 12, and I know there's lots. It's like the duck. There's a lot of activity going on under the surface. So, can you help us there, please? I'm aware, for example, of some Te Awa stormwater improvements, regrade of plantation drain, new pump stations, etc. And that may be Napier City Council work alongside ours. But nevertheless, I think for completeness, can we have, going forward, perhaps next time round, a bit more fulsome reporting around what's happening with our Napier urban waterways, particularly our collaboration with Napier City and what they're doing, and how we're progressing with the MOU, those sorts of... I just want line of sight and on our radar what that looks like, particularly as we go into the long-term plan and start to flesh out our CapEx going forward. Can you just give us an elaboration on what you know today and help us in the future?
I'd love to be able to give you a lot more detail, Councillor Curtin. It's not my portfolio, so I can't give you the detail there. I can certainly feed that back, and perhaps we can bring more information back to council on that. My focus has been in the regional project side of it, so this work hasn't continued on into a project sense, so I don't have visibility of all of the work that's going on in that space right now.
So there's someone on the team that does?
That would be, James Ferrer would be able to answer that. We got the call up at reasonably short notice, and he's in other meetings, so couldn't make it right now, but we can get that feedback to you if that's all right.
I'll wait for the movie to come out.
The movie. Just picking location, yeah.
Any other questions, team? Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Chair, and good timing, Mr Kingsford, exactly the person I needed to talk to. Cyclone Gabriel response is probably a section I'm referring to, but the stop bank at Waipawa, which has had numerous repairs post-cyclone, as you know, there's been a lot of comment from that community about how do we keep certain users off it because of the damage that's causing, particularly motorbikes, four drivers, etc. Meanwhile, we have the Tuk-Tuk trails over in Waipokoro in quite a state of disrepair post-cyclone. And then so seemingly out of the blue to both those communities, really, the stop bank at Waipawa getting limestone cap, if you like, put on it at a cost of $20,000, I've been told, but that could be wrong. And for what reason, when there's probably better purpose for that money to be spent elsewhere. Could you just comment on, I guess, what drove that decision for that new limestone, I guess, cap on the Waipawa bank and the lack of action over at Waipokoro?
Certainly. So if I talk about Waipokoro first, that's not part of my, I haven't been scoped with any repair work of cycle trails. My understanding, which I may stand to be corrected, is that the cycle network in the central Hawke's Bay area was a collaboration between CHBDC and Rotary Pathways Trust. They raised the money, they constructed it, and the agreement was to vest those assets with Hawke's Bay Regional Council. The conversation at that time is that Hawke's Bay Regional Council would accept those assets as vested, but due to the fact that it was in between LTPs, there was no money in Hawke's Bay Regional Council's LTP from a capital or operational perspective to operate, maintain, or undertake any repair work to those trails. So that liability would need to remain with Central Hawke's Bay District Council, which they agreed to. So technically that would place any repair work post-cyclone with CHBDC. So that's my understanding of it. Happy to be corrected, but consequently I have not been briefed or asked to undertake any repairs to the cycle trail network. The stop bank that Councillor Foley refers to as the Coronation Park stop bank, that we some emergency repairs were undertaken without supervision from my team or our pods. That was a very quick response that wasn't undertaken in an engineering manner, and therefore was always going to need to be replaced with a fully engineered embankment, which we then undertook. Upon completion, we, both at this location and most other repaired stop bank locations in our networks, we've had trouble keeping other users off that at a time when the grass strike was either non-existent or still juvenile grass, which has created a lot of damage to our stop banks, including Coronation Park. We felt that it would be impossible to keep everybody off it, and so the best way to protect it from light users would be to cap it with limestone that people could walk along, but it also give us a better surface and better material to put a crest on it or a crown on it that would then shed water both ways, so that it wouldn't pond in any vehicle tracks or other tracks on top of the stop bank. So that's the decision that was made. I confirmed that with our group manager to go ahead with that work, and informed CHBDC probably around a month before that work was going to take place. My recollection is they welcomed that at that time, and so we got it underway. We will attempt to keep any vehicles off it in terms of four-wheel drive and motorbikes. Some of those vehicles can probably get up the embankments of those stop banks. So again, that's where capping it and protecting it with something that will be a bit more enduring than grass and topsoil is the call that we've made. So that's the background to that one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Just a question for Anna on air quality, please, and the effect of silt on air quality. So for some time, I've been amongst a number of people in the community concerned about the implications of wind-blown silt in springtime, particularly as we're coming into what we expect to be an El Nino, and it's been illustrated by stories from post-1938 in the Esk of meters of silt blowing away after being deposited in a flood. So, and I know your team's been monitoring air quality, in part with that silt in mind. Did raise it with the previous interim CEO, just about a general concern about who has the overview about our air quality with silt in mind, particularly on the Hiratonga Plains, but anywhere near large populations. So this equally applies to Wairau, Waipukurau, Waipawa. Who has that overview? And my starting proposition has always been that's, ultimately this is a health issue, a health risk potentially, and Te Whatu Ora should be it, but we probably have the capacity and to inform that with some science, whether it's monitoring or modelling or whatever, to identify, whether via remote sensing or otherwise, where areas of risk might be. I certainly never received the update that I was promised some time ago, that this was under control, that someone was looking at that. So I'm now looking for this, it's getting quite urgent now. We are coming into that spring where this is a risk, so I need some assurance that someone's looking at it and we are playing an appropriate role there, please.
So I think there's a couple of parts to your questions. One is around are we looking at monitoring silt and dust-blown deposition of or capture of silt now, air quality. We have, and we do have a project with under the MB Extreme Weather Funding with both Te Whatu Ora and NIWA, looking at actually collecting data around that. I'm not familiar with the results at the moment, but I can certainly come back to you as to whether or not they have been analysed yet. Part of that was about source apportionment, and we did put some funding in for that source apportionment, which lets us know what kind of composition we're getting in those, because what we monitor is what we're getting are particles that are within that PM10 area. Then what we need to know is, okay, well, what part of that comes from what sources? But I can certainly get a follow-up regarding that. In terms of silt management, and certainly I'm aware that there are some, that there are concerns, and I'm aware of the information around the 1938. I know that there have been conversations about seeding, etc., and that hasn't necessarily been an option in the ESC area, but I'm not sure exactly who that sits with.
Yeah, so perhaps, and thank you for that, but perhaps as I'd received an assurance from the previous interim C that there would be an answer, that we'd be giving an answer about who has the overview, and have some assurance that it's not, we're just simply not going to be surprised, the community is not going to be surprised when the equinox starts to blow and we've got problems. That maybe if I could ask Nick for you to follow this up, and presumably Te Wharaora would be the logical start point. At least that's what we've previously been led to understand. Thank you.
Yep, no, look, happy to do that, I think. I've got a meeting at some point with Te Wharaora on that issue, so I'm just not sure where it is in my diary. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Oh, Councillor Roadley, kia ora.
Kia ora, and thank you, Chair. Not questions so much as just comments. I just wanted to comment on the couple of items or a couple of paragraphs to do with Wairoa, and very pleased to see paragraph 4, that review of the Mahanga wetland is underway, and given that there is a very high level of public interest and dare we say anxiety around this issue, it's been long-standing, I think more than 5 years, potentially 10 years in the making. So great to see that underway, and I'm look forward to a proper long-term solution being developed as a result of that. I'm aware there's a bit of civil unrest happening out there at the moment, and just for any of our listeners at home, great to see that the Works team are actually heading there this week to do some remedial work, which we hope will alleviate the problems that those homeowners are facing. Paragraph 8, also fabulous to see the collaborative approach that's been taken to the flood protection development of that plan for Wairoa with WDC and putting the community at the centre of those discussions, which is really welcome. And just acknowledging, of course, that the central and pivotal role that HBRC take in that responsibility for developing those plans, and looking forward to those discussions via the tripartite committee. I think tomorrow, Chair, will be in that forum. So great to see those couple of items popping up. Thank you.
Thanks, Di.
Team.
There are no other questions. Can I have a mover for both items 16 and 17? Councillor Williams, Councillor Harding. All those that agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. Thanks, team. Thank you. Okay, councillors, there are no minor items. So if we can move into public excluded. Thank you, Councillor Williams and Councillor Harding. All those agree say aye. Those against, carried. Thank you very much. We just have our minutes from the 2nd of August public excluded meeting to confirm. If we're happy with those, can we have a mover, please? Yep, Councillor Williams, Councillor McIntosh. No discussion? No. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Kia ora. Thank you, everyone. Moving back into public included. Councillor Williams, Councillor McIntosh. All those who agree say aye. Those against, carried. It's just a record. We're back in public. So thank you, everyone, for our meeting today. We will close with our normal karakia. If you need your app. have this in the last meeting. Everyone will know it off by heart. Hapai, please join in. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou ariki a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhi ngā tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, āmene. Kia ora everyone.
Kia ora.